This is The Party with Serene
and Pearl.
Get it right, Poddy.
Hey, we are so excited today to have Joel Greene with us. Can I share the story, Serene, before we even say hello to Joel, about how I first kind of got exposed to Joel? I was listening to another podcast. It was called the Superhuman Podcast? Nath Nidham. Anyway, you were on, and I was listening to you, and she talked about your book at the time. It was The Immunity Code. It was the book before this latest one was out. I was just like mouth on the floor because Serena and I kind of campaigned for all the food groups for like the insanity.
Yes.
That we've got all these camps saying, hey, just plants, or hey, just meat, and all this. And then you brought the history, you brought the science of how, come now, everybody, actually, we need them all. And I was like, oh, thank you. There's somebody else out there saying this. Yes. So I got your book. It was incredible. You've got another book now. And I have followed the things you do, Joel. I'm so excited to have you.
Have you followed everything? Is this in the Immunity Code? Was Joel Greene the guy that said, no, for a real test of youth and fitness, you've just got to go out on an all-out sprint from nowhere? Was that you,
yes.
Joel?
Yeah.
Did you do that?
Yeah, I did that.
Okay, good on you.
She saw me sprinting. I was like, hey, Joel Greene told me to do it. Yeah, so hey,
welcome.
welcome.
You to confess yourself.
Thank you. So I'm over the hill. This is great.
We love it because our whole mantra is no more fads and stop the insanity. So we just gel with your whole thought process. But let me just introduce you to our peeps. Joel Greene is the creator of the VEEP Nutrition System. Do your computer there. He is featured author, speaker, and guest in top-tier publications, and his system has been featured on the Dr. Phil Show, among other shows, where it has delivered astounding, life-changing results. He's the author of books such as The Immunity Code and his new book, The Way, which we're waiting for our hard copy, but we've been digitally reading just the last 24 hours because it just got downloaded, and we are loving that. And exactly. We're on pre-order, but that's a book to get.
Oh my goodness.
Is a book
We are going to talk about that today because I've got screenshots and is going to talk about it. But I want to ask you first, Joel, just to get our listeners and viewers familiar with you. Why are you here? I mean, why are you an advocate for health? Why do you cut through all the nonsense that is out there and all the different camps? And why are you bringing truth? Why are you here?
Well, I just feel like I've been on the receiving end myself for so many years, decades, literally. I mean, I started, my own little fitness journey when I was 5, watching Jack LaLanne, and I've done a lot of harm.
That's funny because that's kind of like us. Well, we started getting interested way before 10,
and we did harm. So I want to hear this.
Go for it.
I've just done a lot of harm to myself over the years, just doing what was popular and what I was told to do. I mean, it isn't any one thing; it's a lot of things, but. What happened to me was in my journey, I had about 30 years in just doing, kind of what you saw in magazines and the fitness thing and all that stuff. And a lot of things kind of came out of that. One was I got into chronic weight cycling as a result of just doing really strict and extreme dieting. And the one that really started the whole thing off was in the early 90s. I was on the meal replacement craze doing Metrex, and I was literally the before or the after picture. I mean, I was so, lean from doing that. And everybody was like, wow, what's your secret? Blah, blah, blah. That whole thing. And this is what you never hear. So 5 years after that, I just started eating out of control. Wow. And I didn't know what hit me, but I was just like, I just can't stop eating. What is this? And that really set me on this journey to figure out, like, what did I do? Because I'd never had an issue prior to that. Wow. And I just, and so what I know now is, leptin is the hormone that is not acute. It's long-term, and it works on a really long-term ramp. And so there was kind of, for me, a 5-year payback for the getting really lean part. And then what I discovered over the years was the mid 90s, was that going through that iteration. So what happens is you put weight back on, and then, now I got to solve this problem again. So you try some new technique. And then, I would just try whatever was. So I think the late 90s for me was the everything's fresh, whole, organic phase, that. So I was, kind of doing that. And then I went into the, strict calorie counting macro phase and did that. And every time I would get really, really lean
Yeah.
and then get the blowback from that and regain body fat. And I'd never had issues with chronic weight cycling prior to that. And then what really kind of drove the nail in the coffin was I wound up in a startup company completely. So one of the problems with what we call diet, nutrition, health, fitness is that all of the advice givers have never had real jobs. That's the problem. Okay. Like they don't live in the universe
Yeah.
that real people live in. So for the most part, and it's very well intentioned, but it's just a thing of like, you don't know what it's like until you've been there. So most of that advice for me did not translate into real life. Like when I was, working in a startup company, working 14 hours a day, and there's pressure to be there like at 7:30 in the morning, which means you're up like at 6, and you're getting home after 7, and then you're just completely drained and you want to numb out from stress and you eat carbs and you're getting older and you're getting all this stuff. So then that was kind of the double, the double like whammy of, well, so I've got this sort of issue of chronic weight cycling since, going on, I don't know, 15 years here. And then on top of that, the other problem is sort of the real life circumstance of all my free minutes are 0 right now.
Yeah.
And even if I did have some free minutes, my energy is like 0. And this was, I was turning 40 at the time. I was just really feeling it. So I put on a ton of weight. I was like, and I was ripped when I started that job in 2003. I was lean, probably 5-7% body fat.
Whoa.
And I was,
Ooh, that's low. Probably too low. Yeah.
And I was literally 260 at the end of that. And just flat out fat,
And how tall are you?
I'm almost 6'3". So,
okay. Yeah.
And I've been going to the gym a lot too, like in the last year of that. So I had a ton of muscle. I mean, I was like, right now I wear like maybe an XL. I was a 3X up top in my shirt. So I had a ton of muscle. So disputing the theory that all you need to do is add muscle, that's not true.
Yeah.
Muscle. Okay. I was huge, but I was just fat and could really feel. What really turned it for me was one of the kids in the neighborhood wanted to come over and wrestle. They always want to wrestle. And so we got a minute into it and I was like, okay, I gotta regroup. And I was like, okay, like I'd always been an athlete. I'm like, this ain't working for me. Yeah. I'm borderline a heart attack here with 1 minute of exertion.
Wow.
And that for me was like, okay, I'm gonna really turn this around. And for me, I just started really thinking a lot about what worked and what didn't work, and what would work, in that job scenario, and a whole what you would call biohacking today kind of came out of that, because really, it was all about, I need to create the most powerful range of probability that I can create, meaning the thing that takes the least amount of time and has the biggest impact over time. So if I could add in 10 things that, had took a little bit of time, a little bit of effort, one example is just, if I could reset the gut, if I could just do that takes a little bit of time. And then over time, get this massive shift, that would have helped me. And if I could stack those, and it's just acknowledging the reality that when you are not in this bubble of, being fit, and that's how you make your living, when you don't live in that bubble, the circumstances from time to time are going to take you to, you have absolutely zero time.
I love how you're bringing this for people in the real world. I love it.
And one thing that you said the 5-year thing, and you talk about that in your new book, The Way.
Yeah.
And you talk about the different diets. And Serena and I, this is our story too. We tried them all. Whatever the wisdom of man was saying, we're like jumping on it. It's the new thing.
And not just jumping on it for 3 weeks. I mean, we were jumping on it like die hard. We'd dogmatically fight for the arguments. I mean, we were years. I was a raw food plant vegan for
8.
Yeah, probably like almost a decade, having babies through that.
You're like, and we noticed it too. Whenever we'd go to something new, we'd feel jolly fantastic. Yeah. I mean, this is great. Of course, we're going to be dogmatic. This is fantastic. And I talked to
all your problems go away in the first 4 months.
People, I've talked to them on carnivore right now. But Pearl, don't talk against carnivore. I've never felt better. But you say, hey, show me yourself in 5 years. You're like, we don't know until 5 years.
Everything needs time.
Well, actually, can you explain that a bit better? You say it more eloquently.
Well, you said it pretty well, but so in the new book, the reason I wrote the new book is that there are what I call several unavoidable realities that exist. And the framework we have for diet is completely missing these realities. And when I say unavoidable, what I mean is it's going to hit you. It's just a question of when. It's going to happen. And there's this bigger picture of diet that really needs to be kind of set in on the current understanding of it. And if it is, it would change the lives of millions of people, because what you're doing is you're going down a road blindly. Like you're going down this road just not knowing what happens 4 or 5 turns down the road. There's no map telling you what happens. So, you hit this patch where you're going downhill and everything's so easy and you're going so fast and it feels so good. You're like, wow, this is never going to end. And then at the bottom of that, there's an uphill where it's like, oh, why are we going so slow? Why is everything so hard?
Yeah.
And that's the reality of the road.
Wow.
And what it is there are critical realities that the framework for diet today is clueless, just completely clueless about, has no acknowledgement, no recognition of. And this isn't some mystical mumbo jumbo. Like when I start explaining this, or when you read it in the book, it's so in your face. It's so obvious. You're like, oh my gosh, why? What have we been doing? You realize like we've been in this reality distortion sphere. So one example is the effects of time. Okay. And I make this case in the new book that all diets as we know them today, they are disconnected from time.
Yeah,
They're
they
completely disconnected from the impact of time. What do I mean by that? I mean that, and I describe this in the new book, there are fundamental forces you can acknowledge in 30 seconds are completely real, and over time they work to change the equation, most often towards the negative, and they are the force of things that accumulate, the force of things that degrade, so accumulation, degradation, the force of things that compensation, okay? And finally, the force of attenuation, those 4 things. So accumulation, degradation, compensation, those 4 things. Accumulation, degradation, compensation, attenuation, those 4 things. Super, super, super easy to prove. You can prove this easily, okay? Let me give you the example of example would be the gut bacteria. The bacteria in the gut. So you change your diet, you go on a specific way of eating, let's say it's carnivore, okay? You are taking in food for the gut bacteria. And you are feeding and advantaging very specific species based on that diet. You are disadvantaging other species. So over time, there is a compensation, of, so you're losing one set of bacteria, you're gaining other sets. The sets you're gaining very often are pathogenic. You're gaining fusobacteria, which is a protein fermenter, which is a known cancer promoter, okay? So the result of time is that there's going to be a degradation of the gut lining because you're disadvantaging species that maintain it.
Right.
This is so stupid, so ridiculously easy to prove, and diet today is completely divorced from it.
Yeah.
And like you just take a second and look at this and see it's true, and you're just like, what have we been doing?
I know they don't want to listen because they're in that free fall where it's going so fast. All of the benefits are just blowing their hair back in the wind. Like, I don't even want to care about those studies because I just feel so great. Right.
I would love for you to just talk to our listeners and viewers about many things they bring up and they ask us about. But I would love you to address them because you do it so well in your last book, but even more in your new book, The Way. But I want to talk about the myths, right? I want to talk about lectins, oxalates, carbs, dairy, vegan, all of it. But last night I was reading your book. And I was lying in bed reading your book and I was like, I wanted to get up and give you a standing ovation. I really did. I was like cheering because
She called me this morning. She was like, she said those same things. I was going to give him a standing ovation. I was going to stand up in the dark in my bedroom, my little nightlight.
I tell you why. Guys, if you get the book just for this chapter, it's worth it. There's so much other good stuff in there. You talked about how, you got your camps and you talked about how you took meat, for example. And you said, people say that meat is like the worst food in the world. Stay away from it. Other people say, no, just live on meat. That's all you need. Who's right? So you said, I'm going to show you and I'm going to take a chapter and tell you about the problems of meat. And you go into it. I mean, you're like, are you convinced yet? Do you want to stay away from meat? And you brought study after study. And it was like meat was the worst thing in the world. Even me, who I love meat, I was thinking, should I even eat meat? You know, it was like compelling, right? And then you go, hold on, let's look at another side. And then you brought the side that meat is actually the
You wanted to have a
healthiest,
steak for breakfast.
the
after
healthiest
that.
food in the world, and why we need it, and our body depletes without it. And you brought them all, and you just cut through the junk of both sides.
But
And you,
both sides is truth.
yeah, and you
just
said
need
like,
to have
what's
it
the
in
truth? And you said, and I'm speaking for you, but I got so excited, I just wrote this down. You said, and what's the answer? The answer is diversity. And you said it much more eloquently than that. But meat, yes, alone, it's actually harmful, but with things, and you called them foraging foods. Serena and I always say meat need plants, but you said meat needs other things. And oh my goodness, no one's doing that, what you're doing, Joel. We've been trying to do it, but that was a whole chapter on it. I think the whole world needs to jolly well read it.
Love it.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so that gets to an underlying another missing reality, and this one is so important that it really needs to really need to get on the roofs and bang the drum of this, because it's really, really important. And it's that basically, if we come back to just nature for a minute, and we can agree that the rhythms of nature by themselves are inherently beneficial. Like light and dark is beneficial, cold and hot, all these nature has rhythms of eating that are natural, and anybody can prove it. I had a guy who runs a survival course in Australia reached out to me, and he said, "You're exactly right. This is what happens." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, what happened when the last time he did it?" He told me what he ate. It's exactly what I said in the book. There's these rhythms that happen in nature, and it's basically this: the driving force of eating in nature is scarcity. So you don't have refrigerators stocked full of food, and so therefore the nature of scarcity forces diversity into the diet. And what's interesting is when you look at diversity from the perspective like, well, if the natural rhythms of nature are beneficial, is it possible that diversity is beneficial? Whoa. And as soon as you open up that, bam, it completely changes everything. So let's take the example of meat. What I do in the book is I argue both sides, and I just try and make a very convincing case either way. And, down the side of, well, meat's bad, I bring up all these points like, it alkalizes the colon, and contrary to popular belief, alkalinity in the colon will give you cancer. It drives pathogenic bacteria like bifidobacteria, and I go and I show these things. But then the other side of the equation is, no, actually you need meat because it's your number one source of forms of sialic acid. The brain cannot form without them. And the colon itself, all of the enterocytes in the colon and the peptides and everything in meat really do feed, not the colon, they feed the intestines very well. Well, so here's the issue, and this is the thing that just like it's a smoking gun. It destroys the diets of this era. And it's basically this: you have these food tribes, like there's the meat tribe, the plant tribe. And according to the meat tribe, you shouldn't eat the plants because lectins and, all these other things, oxalates and all that, and they're bad. So what turns out to be true? The foods that they're saying you shouldn't eat protect you from the toxicities of the foods you say that I should eat.
I love that. Yeah.
That's the reality.
Yes.
There's like example after example. So the simple example is in the gut, and that's the locus of fermentation, meaning, what are we mostly fermenting? And so if we just take in some of these foods they're telling us not to eat, like some spinach, some, leafy greens, or some fibers or what have you, the fermentation in the gut shifts away from the pathogenic bacteria and shifts towards the commensals. So we solve those problems. But where it gets really, really interesting, you may not have gotten to this one yet in the book, is when you start to talk about the cardiovascular system and saturated fats.
Yeah.
This is where it destroys everything. Just blows you away when you get this, which is that, so as we age, there are two big problems that everybody's going to face, unavoidable. And they all have to do with the cardiovascular system, and it impinges on saturated fats. So as we age, there are these enzymes that line the cardiovascular system, and they have a really big word, but the simple word is NOx, N-O-X, the NOx enzymes. And what's special about these enzymes is they are the only enzymes that we know of whose job is to produce free radicals. That's their job. And it's beneficial when we're young. But what happens is when we get old, they sort of the accelerator gets stuck, the throttle gets stuck, and they start just spitting out free radicals like crazy. So you can literally trace most cancers, most pathologies to hyperactivation of free radicals inside the endothelium, the lining of the vasculature, from these enzymes. And so it's just an age thing, just happens with age. Well, along with that, what happens is the other problem. So inside the vasculature, there's these hairs. It's like fur. It's called the glycocalyx. And it's like a tensioning mechanism. Basically, its job is to sense the tension within the vasculature and send signals. And then just like the gut junctions can open up, so the gut junctions can open up, we can get leaky gut, same thing in the vasculature. The vascular junctions can open up.
Okay.
Well, that's not necessarily bad. They need to vasodilate, but what happens is chronic. So when these enzymes in the vasculature turn on, and with age, what happens is we lose that fur, we lose the glycocalyx. What happens is the vasculature tends to open up like this. Well, now you're looking at vascular disease.
Right.
And so what gets interesting about that is the role of saturated fats. So we get to this, are saturated fats good? Are they bad? Well, it turns out that if you really look at this question, it's conditional. So if your vasculature is healthy, meaning the NOx enzymes are not overactivated and you still have the glycocalyx, saturated fats for the most part aren't really going to do much harm. However, exact same person 20 years down the line, when the vasculature has begun to decline, so you have excessive free radical production from these enzymes, you have the loss of the glycocalyx, and now saturated fats are massively destructive. And it's this, you could take the same person, and the difference is just simply the condition of the vasculature. Guess what fixes the problem?
Please tell us.
So all the foods that we're told not to eat from the meat tribe, things like the oxalate containing foods, which have, oh my gosh, it's got, it's got phytic acid. Gee, that actually helps. It actually helps restore the vasculature.
That's what we were saying in our first.
Very
good.
Yeah, and then berries, which have all these specific phenols, and they work together to minimize damage from saturated fats. And when you look at things like adiponectin, so adiponectin, as we get older, we get heavier, we make less adiponectin. And so then what happens is saturated fats tend to drive insulin resistance. So the way to restore adiponectin, one of them is through these foods like leafy greens they're telling us not to eat. So what we find here, to wrap all this up, is diversity produces global benefits that neutralize the toxic aspects of opposing foods. So if there's these toxic aspects to meat, diversity protects me from those. And it's nature's way of keeping you from getting too much of anything, which makes sense.
So good. So good, Joel.
Sound.
You know, we haven't come out with our next book either, but it's Trim Healthy Wisdom. And it's really to women who are going through our seasons, which is perimenopause and postmenopause. And our bodies change too. And like you said, when you get this vascular changes, you have to, what might have been great for you in your younger years, you kind of got to tweak things, right? More plants. Well, postmenopausal woman and, perimenopausal woman, we still need the essentials. We still need the meat. We need the amino acids, of course, to build muscle. And all.
We need protein more than we ever did at that age.
But we need the greater plants. Yes. I mean, we need the polyphenols. We need greater amounts of these things. That's what we've discovered ourselves. And so we're so on the same page with you. But I would love you to talk about for a minute, because I want to go through each one. But in your new book, as well as your last one, but more so in this new one, you go into the history of the fossilized poop that they've found from people. Everyone says, well, Grok didn't eat anything, but
what he could dong on the head.
Yeah, what he could dong on the head. But you say, hey, this is not true, guys. So you brought the real truth. Could you talk to our listeners about that?
Yeah. So
grains.
The way that I characterize it in the book is that we have been fed a narrative, a story about what our ancestors did, and it doesn't fit the best available evidence that we know, the most recent evidence. So there's a method. There's several versions of the scientific method. There isn't just one. One of them is called abduction. It's actually the method Darwin used, which is you take the best evidence you have and then you guess. You infer based on the best evidence well, based on this, here's what we think happened. Okay. Well, if you take the very latest evidence and you take all of it and look at it, what it strongly supports is that our ancestors ate essentially varied and balanced diets that were rich in not just meat, yes, meat, but fish, but also plants, nuts, basically a full spectrum of diet. Even grains seem to be in the picture. The conventional view is that farming didn't start till, a few thousand years ago, but actually there's evidence now that going back 50,000 years that they were making, bread products out of grain.
Yeah.
And so we have this narrative, this story that doesn't fit the reality of what our ancestors actually did. And it turns out if you just factor in scarcity, kind of makes sense. Like if scarcity is part of the picture, then there's going to be variety in the diet, and scarcity forces diversity, and then diversity produces natural benefits. So that's kind of the high level.
So
I just love it.
I would love we get all these questions all the time, but Serena and Pearl, what about lectins? Can we go through each one? I would just love your take. What about lectins? We're being scared. I mean, if you even open your social media, you're going to have lectin phobia, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we're not.
No,
but
most
we want
people
to hear it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, first of all, so the polarized view is that lectins are only bad. That's not true. That's absolutely 100%
Isn't there
not
lectins
true.
in okra that we need? And that, I mean, they're incredible. Yeah.
So depends on the type of lectin, but there's a number of lectins that are actually beneficial. In fact, when it comes to breast cancer research, lectins are kind of at the forefront of that. Plant lectins, are being looked at as like, wow, maybe we could cure breast cancer through plant lectins. Part of the issue that's left out of the picture seems to be the dose. So it turns out that if we factor in dosing, they seem to be beneficial in low amounts, and then in high amounts, they seem to possibly produce negative effects. The other picture that's left out is the microbiome. So the flawed view is that it's just the foods and that that's all we need to know. Well, that's incorrect. I mean, that's provably wrong, provably false. What's correct is that it's the makeup of the microbiome plus the foods, and together you get an outcome. Right. And that outcome's a variable. So if you have what's called it's called the big word, it's called an enterotype. It just means your signature for the microbiome in your gut. If you have one that is basically extremely health promoting, like you have good makeup of bifidobacteria, lactobacillus, akkermansia, then the issues you see with many lectins are negated. Right. Versus if you have like basically a dysbiotic gut, then so there's all these variables here. There's the dose, there is the makeup of the microbiome, there's the specific lectins in question.
And would you say a dysbiotic gut are often when you got high doses of lectins as well? Because if you have a dysbiotic gut, sometimes you're just eating, a lot of trashy foods, and you're having a lot of, say, white bread. You're having a lot of the things that contain a lot of lectins too. So it's double whammy, right?
Yeah, I mean, yes, exactly. The big takeaway really is just that it's not as simple as like, lectin bad, don't eat. No, it's not that simple. It's that there's an equation, and the equation is what is your microbiome? Is your microbiome loaded in what are called commensals, or is it kind of dysbiotic? And then what are the specific lectins? Some lectins are involved in immunity in a very big way, and they're very, very beneficial for immunity. So clearly wrong is, lectin's bad. That's wrong.
Would you say for somebody who has, a very dysbiotic gut, that there should be maybe a healing window where they are very careful about lectins for just a season, but they need to pull them back in because you can't have a proper diversity, like you said, like a diverse microbiome, a robust microbiome, without a little bit of everything, right? You need the plants, you need the meat, you need it all. So I think, would it just be a season of healing and then to incorporate them back in for those who don't have the right microbiome to maybe cancel out some of the negative effects of lectins?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Generally, like the way that I look at that is everybody should do a gut reset once to twice a year. Like everybody in the world. I'd love everybody in the world do my gut reset twice a year, because it's just like such a foundational thing that affects so many other things. But in the process of doing that, you kind of have to look at, well, are there particular food allergies here? That's a question we have to ask. Are there like massive food sensitivities here? And so as you're going through that reset, you can back off on those foods, do the basic gut reset, And then another thing that's missing that I talk about a lot in the book is titration.
Right.
And so that a lot of issues that we think are inherently problematic from foods are not the issue with the food. It's that you don't have the horsepower to handle them yet.
Right.
And you need to build it up over time. And
yeah.
so there's actually a word for this. It's called oral immunotherapy. It's actually a real thing.
I love that.
So you can look up oral immunotherapy, and you know how it works? Yeah, titrate. You titrate in tiny amounts of food,
Right.
and you just slowly do it over time. I've had people go from massive, can't touch something, get sick to my stomach, to being able to handle it, and it's just a question of you start
Right.
with half, the size of a pea, start with
Right.
half that.
You were
Wow,
talking
that's
about that
so
with
interesting.
dairy. I think on one of the podcasts I was listening to you, and you were like, hey, people are like the same thing. Dairy, very bad, get away from dairy. But you're like, we need dairy. I mean, you can live life without, but dairy is so health positive in so many ways, and even for the gut, right? I heard you talking about this, and you just talked about titration. Can we talk into I had it down further in the list, but right now, dairy is bad. What would you like to say to that?
Yeah, it sounds like a Frankenstein movie. Dairy, bad. Yeah. So dairy is probably the single most vilified food on
That's
right
what
now.
I think. Yes.
The single most vilified food, and even people who are high level experts are like, no dairy, bad, dairy bad.
Yeah.
The thing to understand about dairy, number one, there is massive amounts of research, like literally impossible to ignore research on the health benefits of dairy, and it's massively comprehensive. So it runs the spectrum from improving insulin sensitivity to helping to prevent weight regain, to just all kinds of benefits to dairy. The problem dairy suffers from more than any other food is conflation. And this is such a bad problem that I needed a whole chapter on it in the new book, which is the missing reality of essentially we conflate foods. And I called it the grades of food problem, in that all food comes in grades. And so a lot of the arguments used to vilify any food are always aimed at the lower grades. They're always like, well, dairy's bad. And they're talking about it's probably, when you're talking about massively mass produced, homogenized, corn fed, Roundup fed dairy.
Pasteurized cream cheese,
Kraft cheese on
Right.
pizza.
Yeah.
But when you get into the higher grades, which is a case that's true of any food, all foods have high grades.
Yeah.
Well, then the issues they reverse, and what you see are just benefits. So we got to get out of this thing of conflating grades of food with the food itself.
Yes.
And that's the biggest problem with dairy, is that, well, dairy's bad. No, you're talking about grades of dairy. But I can make that argument for the foods you think are good.
Right.
So it's true of anything.
So true. It's so true. I mean, dairy has been a huge part of the healing for my body too. And, because I was totally vegan and off of dairy at times when I should have been incorporating these balanced kind of foods in times of reproduction, when I was having my babies and nursing through the night. But my health really plummeted by just excluding. And that's what I love. I love that your mission is to bring back balance, and it's our mission too. But I remember at that very broken stage, I just kind of I'd listened to all the gurus. I'd listened to all of what everyone just tells you, everything that sounds trendy and what seems to make sense at the time. And I'd just been broken. So I just peeled the Bible open in my nose. I'd gone there for spiritual wisdom, but I'd never really gone there for the practical day to day. And I'm like, it's got to be in here. I'm so broken. I need help. And I love that scripture that I found in Deuteronomy. And today it's kind of my theme scripture. And it kind of rounds off everything what we're saying here. And it's like, I give you the herb of the field, the blood of the grape, the fat of the ram, the milk of the goat, the harvest of the field. And I went through all of the food groups, and it was like, here it is. It's a gift. Celebrate. And I was like, all I've done is excluded. All I've done is hate this, hate that. You can only have this. And it was all camps, and it was all just division. And here it was so poetically said, no, I give all this to you. And it was the full spectrum. It was all the diversity. And I love that. And it was the milk of the goat in there. And I'd been so anti-dairy. And then I had read on, and there was a scripture that was like, and I give you the milk, and the word was maintenance of the maidens. It was King James I was reading, but the King James version. But really, when I looked up in Hebrew, that word maintenance, it meant the freshening, the flourishing. And so I was like, wow, that's what I need. I feel so, my bones, everything for my age, I just felt so undone. And so the dairy, I went to the top quality, the high grade. You know, I did the
Kefir,
yeah,
goat milk kefir.
I did the raw goat's milk from like goats in my backyard that were on grass that was out in the country. And I tell you what, my health, it was almost miraculous. Almost miraculous. I literally feel decades younger now than I did. Yeah.
Totally believe it. One of the most powerful foods I've used for a number of years post-workout is that there's a store here where you can get, you know, raw grass-fed dairy, and I just use that as a post-workout, and it's so energizing. It's so like you're like, oh man, I feel amazing after that.
Yes,
Yeah,
you do.
totally do.
I want to talk about oxalates because they're a biggie right now. What do you have to say about oxalates?
Yeah, that's a big one. So again, that fits into the food tribe of oxalate bad, you know.
Yeah.
And the truth is that it's another chapter in the book is the missing reality of the microbiome and how the microbiome essentially acts as a firewall. It acts as a firewall to essentially detoxify and break down things that otherwise could be detrimental. The really important thing to understand is that it's a variable, so it's not fixed. So you could have one scenario, which is, here's the oxalate foods, I ate them, I absorbed the oxalates, that's bad. Completely true. You could have another scenario where I have an optimized gut microbiome, I ate the oxalates, and the oxalate degrading bacteria broke them down. And I got all the benefits of those foods, like all the benefits of leafy greens, and I didn't get any of the negatives. That's completely true.
Yeah.
And then to bring more truth to this, you have to introduce a bell curve. Okay. So without a bell curve, we're just dealing with essentially fantasy. Once you introduce a bell curve, then we get real. And I do this in the book. So what I do is I introduce a bell curve and I say, okay, let's go back to school. Here's a bell curve. What this means is that the first mean is about 64% of the people, and the second takes us up to about 94%. So the mean and the standard deviation. Okay. And what you see here is a range. So you see that it's not as simple as I eat oxalate foods and oh my gosh, all these negatives. And it's also not as simple as, I have the perfect microbiome. I eat all these oxalate foods and I'm perfect. I'm impregnable. Nothing happens to me. You know, neither's true. There's a range, and most people will experience somewhere in that range. 94% of people will be in the first two standard deviations, meaning that if you have the oxalate degrading bacteria in your gut, you're going to be getting more benefits than negatives, is what that means. Now, there's going to be, you know, a third standard deviation, which is like 4% on either side of that curve, and that's not going to be true. So that's the reality, is that nothing's this bulletproof ray of light from the sky that just transforms everything. There's a range with everything. But what's missing, the reality of the oxalate argument that's completely missing. And there are I've had like legions of the oxalate tribe attack me and bring in their hero and want to debate me and all this stuff. It's fine. I like all that. But what's completely missing from that they just refuse to acknowledge is that there is a reality, and it's a well-documented reality. There's over 700 species of bacteria, Lactobacillus, bifido, and others that degrade oxalates. Right. And if your microbiome is rich in these bacteria, then you get the benefits of leafy greens. And the benefits of leafy greens cannot be dismissed, because once you factor in the vasculature, we need them in the diet. Right. When you really understand, like, there are certain things that are higher than others, and at the top of the list is the system tasked with getting glucose and oxygen into cells. Because if either one of those are gone, you're dead. You're dead immediately. So the vasculature sits at the top of the list. And when you look at how things combine, like berries and leafy greens, begin to protect and heal the vasculature, it's case closed. We must have these in the diet, and nature has provided a way to do it. Yeah. So it turns out that when there's diversity and variety in the diet, you're going to have the commensal bacteria in the gut, and you're going to have the horsepower to degrade oxalates from the diet. What is completely false is that, foods with oxalates are bad and avoid them. It's just completely false. Can be provably shown to be false. And it's the equation, the real equation is these foods have oxalates. There's potentially negatives. The microbiome is this variable, and an optimized microbiome has the power to detoxify oxalates in the gut, so you get the benefits and not the negatives. That's the reality.
And it's so much more fun to me, work on your microbiome than just to keep removing everything. I mean, it's just, you end up with nothing to eat when you're afraid of oxalates, lectins, phytates, saponins. I mean, the list goes on. In the end, you've just got life is very devoid of celebrating food at that point.
Yeah, phytates are another one too. That's so that's another one. You know, the argument with phytates is, oh, they bind minerals in the gut. Provably false if you have the right microbiome.
Right.
So the right microbiome prevents phytates from binding minerals in the guts. And then we get into the benefits of phytates. Ooh, wait, what? Benefit? What?
Yeah.
Like that's blasphemy to the meat tribe. Wait, no, there's no benefits. Yeah, there are. Massive benefits to phytates in the diet.
Yeah.
Number one being the pineal. Like number one, like as you age, your pineal turns to bone, and that's why you can't sleep when you get over 60, because this thing's it's mineralized. And anybody that thinks that's woo-woo science, it's not. It's hard science.
Yeah.
The phytate, the pineal with age crystallizes.
Wow.
Well, phytates are your number one weapon to help that phytic acid.
Phytates are, am I right or wrong that they're quite high doses in whole grain, the husk of the grain, right? Mm-hmm. So let's talk about grains. We already have, and the fact that, you know, people said Grok wasn't eating grains. Well, perhaps he was, if there ever was a Grok. But, you know, grains. What do you have to say about grains? What do you have to say about our favorite food, oatmeal?
Yeah.
I know you have quite a lot to say in your book.
Yeah, that's another
probably one of the highest grains in phytate, right?
Yeah.
Is oats.
Yeah. So oats are kind of second to dairy in terms of the whipping boy of different tribes. You know, like, oh, oats are bad because of this, and that.
And we're Scottish, remember? So just be friendly to our pottage.
Oh, that's right. You guys are Scottish?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Of descent. It's our history.
We're Campbells.
Yes, the Campbells. That's our maiden
freaking
names.
Campbell family.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's awesome. I'm Scottish, by the way. I have some Scottish in me.
Ah.
Of course you do. That's why we're friends.
Yeah, that's right.
Absolutely.
You do that too well.
Oatmeal. So oats. Like, I mean, running a close second to dairy in terms of being vilified, maybe going to overtake, I think. I know a lot of guys have been beating up on oats. So the first problem is conflation. They're conflating lower grades of oats, and so you get into the aflatoxins and all that kind of debate. But when you start to look at like the benefits from oats in the diet, they are profound. I mean, they are profound. Just starting with the way that they feed the different compounds of fibers in oats,
the beta glucans and
rabilax, all that. Yeah, they feed the commensal bacteria in very powerful ways. I saw one argument that was, well, you should avoid oats because they drive rheumatoid arthritis, which was super easy to debunk because they actually feed the species of bacteria that readjust the ratios of T cells to their correct. So you have one type called a Th17, another type called a Th1, and they need to be kind of in a certain ratio. And well, oats feed the species of bacteria that help them to get back to that ratio. And so they are just one of the healthiest foods out there. And there's the thing is, there's tons of research that says that. There's tons of research that says, you know, that, wow, they're beneficial for insulin function. They're beneficial for immune function. In fact, you cannot separate immunity, the gut, and insulin. You can't separate the two out or the three out. They're actually one thing. So we have a gut immune axis, meaning that the foods we eat affect not just the microbiome, but they affect the immune system. Okay. And they do it together at the same time. And so we need to keep the gut immune axis optimized, and oats are one of the best foods to help do that because they feed the specific species of bifidobacteria that work directly on antigen sensing in the gut that help keep those ratios of T cells where they need to be. All of the issues regarding oats really are conflation issues. You know, that's what they are. They're either conflation issues of, like, you know, oats in packets with sugar and processed oats or lower grades, but they're never talking about, like, you know, organic whole oats. They're never talking about that.
Okay, I've got to ask you a question just from my purist mindset. You know, I came out of just being very caught up with having to have, you know, the best of the grade to the point where I could hardly live in the world. But, you know, everything, when I loved grains and celebrated grains, well, I still do, but I'm a little bit more free in it. But I used to have to soak everything because I was a little afraid of the phytic acid way back. So I had to soak and ferment. And if I was going to have oatmeal, I had to stick a rye starter into the oatmeal, 2 days before and break the phytic acid completely, blah, 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 blah. Now I just simplify life and I just do the sprouted oats. But maybe why am I even doing that? But my head was like, well, way back when they used to leave the grains in sheaves overnight and the dew and whatever probably half broke down some of it. Should I just leave it all and just have organic oats regular, or is there some benefit to the fact that I do choose
Good
sprouted?
question. I want to know your answer, Mr. Joel Greene.
I think there's definitely benefits to like in terms of tiers of food and grades. Yeah, I would put the sprouted at a level above like organic.
And it's not just because, but talk to me about the phytic. Of course, sprouted, of course, nutrients, they often multiply when
Higher
something's
protein.
sprouted or fermented. The protein is a little higher. Maybe things are more released from the food. But as far as the phytic acid is concerned, if I'm just choosing sprouted just because of phytic acid, am I being like a silly head?
Well, I wouldn't use that word, but I mean, the amounts are negligible, like for that specific purpose. Yeah. I mean, I've just found that after 50 plus years of doing this, that, when you really take it all in, I mean, we're in a contaminated fishbowl and you're stuck in it. There's chemtrails in the sky. There's, when you really want to get into this, I mean, it's just not, we don't have it's very difficult to get to a pure environment anymore. Very difficult. So we're in degrees of things, and I endeavor to do the highest degree that I can. But the other trade-off is just the time and the effort,
Right.
and
expense.
I look at
yeah.
I just sort of look at it like when there's a really good diversity in the diet, and then there's some really good supplements around that. And then some other things. I'm doing the best I can do, and I could probably ratchet it up another 20%, but I'd have to live like out in the woods with you guys.
And be a bit of a psycho, yeah. But I keep thinking to myself, I think one of the biggest things for health too is positivity and
it's sure faith moves mountains, right there.
And just belief and just a joy in life. And I feel like I can't wake up with that joy if I'm keep completely thinking that the world is just. And I know there is a level of truth that it is just getting worse and worse and crazier. But I also believe that God wants us to thrive in 2024 as much as he did way back 2,000 years ago. For just say in the Bible days, I just feel like God cares. He says, in the Bible that I want you to prosper, just as your soul prospers and be in great health. And so I feel like he's got answers for us today. And they don't have to be answers that make us worship the everyday, where we have to just worship health, where we have to put it above everything else, because like you said, you'd have to be a psycho if you wanted to ratchet it up 20%, above what you do. So I feel like we have to be able to live, and be kind of just not so stressed about it. But do you believe that there are answers out there for us? Things that we can find in foods and maybe isolate or whatever, that we can get our our pathways, detoxing some of this junk out. I just don't want to think, well, there's no hope for maybe our great grandchildren.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah. This is a whole other show.
It is. It's a whole other show.
On a much
But when you
topic.
said fishbowl of toxins, I get it. I hear a lot of health enthusiasts talk, and sometimes I just skip chapters when it starts getting negative. Like, I just can't even go there because I feel helpless, But I just feel like there is a part in our brain that we just need to have faith, and we just need to kind of like, I don't know, just know that there is provision for us today somehow, in some way.
Yeah, the Bible says be joyful always,
Yeah.
and I think always was meant to include all points in history. So even in this period, like we're meant to be joyful. Like, God loves to bless, loves to give. God's nature is just so he's so kind. His nature is so kind and so giving that he when we're right with him, he loves to bless us. And it's very easy to like get caught up in the news of the day, which is unprecedented. We don't know, what are we gonna do, and what are we gonna do, and but you can. I believe that like your path could literally be stolen from you by getting too far down that road.
Yeah,
because it gets you out of like our job is to fill the world with the knowledge of Jesus. That's our job.
Yes.
Okay. It's
Yeah.
not my job to educate everybody about, Evil Incorporated out there and all these things going on.
Yeah.
So that I'm kind of with you on that, like in terms of, there's a balance between taking today for what it is and, do not worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow will sufficient for today, or today's troubles.
Yeah.
So.
Sorry for sidetracking everybody, but it's just something that I think about. I keep thinking God has something for us. And I mean, it's him that holds the world in his hands, and us and our health. And sometimes for me, I can get so works orientated where I feel like it's me. It's up to me for my health. And yes, we have to get up every day and choose life. Like, the Bible says, choose life so that you and your children may live. I want to choose life on my plate. I want to choose life in the way that I have diversity on my plate, choose life in my thoughts and choose life in everything. But I don't want to get to the point where I think it's all up to me to, I don't know, keep my health perfect.
Yeah, I feel it. There's a point where you cross over into like kind of becomes like almost like an idol in a way, where there's a balance to it. Like with what I do, I mean, I could literally spend my whole day working out, if I wanted to, and just, worship the flesh in a sense, but, it's just, there gets a point where it becomes something else. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a
I
whole
agree.
other thing.
I totally agree.
You finished your sidetrack?
Yeah, I finished.
Okay, good. She loves her sidetrack, which is great. Everyone, our listeners love her sidetracks. But I was going to get back to the whole food thing. But speaking of your sidetrack a little bit, I'll meet you halfway. And that, Joel, I know you have some fantastic supplement. Like thinking going back to when they only had foods, right? And you said at the beginning of your book, the way you talk about how food, I'll actually quote you in a minute. All the things that we can do the supplements. You have some brilliant supplements. I mean, like I've bought some from your website. They're great. We couldn't do those. I do think, like you said, God is kind. I do think supplements in this time that we're living in a toxic world are part of provision from God. Like we might not have the perfect soil, and we might not be able to, get this fresh, beautiful food that's not got chems and all those things. But we can jolly well isolate some pretty fantastic things.
I mean, I even think just too with bioidentical hormones, I just was reading the other day, and I think it was just in the Old Testament, and Moses was saying, my bones are still filled with sap. And he was ancient, mate. And then there was, I think, was it Joshua, one that says, was it Caleb? One of the two that said, I'm 80 now. I'm stronger than when I was 40. Let me take the high country. And I'm like, I just really believe that now we may not have what they had, but we've got other things.
What do you
maybe we
think?
can, in bioidentical hormones, there can be a man in his 90s with his bones filled with sap, maybe.
We're in an entirely new age that's never existed before. Like my wife and I were watching like reruns of The Love Boat from the 70s the other day, and we're just like, oh my gosh, everybody looks so old when they were like in their 40s.
Yeah.
Like, they look like they're in their 60s, and we're in this age now where people are just pushing back the clock 40 plus years. Like you're looking at people who are 60 that like I'm gonna be 60 this year, and they just don't look it.
No, you look 40.
Yeah,
38.
Well,
that's right.
This is the age that we're in, and it's due to all this technology that we have.
Yes.
So
So there's that provision, that I was talking about, that I feel like every era has something where we can prosper because God is kind and it's.
But in your book, you talk about all these wonderful things that we do have. But you said, I love what you said because I agree with this. You said, you were talking about food is input. Food is everything. It's the thing. May I read from your book, Joel?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love this part too. I read it this morning.
Yeah. Over time, the inputs your body receives from the food you eat, day in and day out, meal after meal, dictate and program your health, the quality of your life, and the length of your years, for better or for worse. All of the pivotal health issues everyone will face, things like cognitive decline and cardiovascular issues, stroke and heart attack, are cumulative. They are the result of meal by meal, day by day inputs. Likewise, the key to lasting health is small shifts done every single day. The only thing you are absolutely guaranteed to do day after day, year after year is eat. And if
great.
food is the principal way most people lose their health, not ironically, food is also the way most people regain their health. Consistently, when a person decides to get healthy once and for all, food is the way. Food is the foundational way to regaining physical vitality, good health, energy, immunity, and even quality sleep. I love that because it's simple and it's first. We can have all the supplements in the world. We can take all the hormones. We can do all this, but it's junk. I mean, it's the Christian cuss word crap if we are not doing food right. Yeah?
Oh, I totally agree.
Yeah. The thing about food, so I've just, I've been around a while, so I've seen a lot come and go, and that's an advantage, I think, because I've just seen, you name it, I've seen it, and things tend to come and go in 5-year periods.
Yes.
And I have I don't do a lot of coaching anymore. I have a very small handful of people who've been with me a number of years, and they have everything. I mean, everything you can think of, they have, and they don't use it. Really, that's the truth. But so when we look at like the health inputs, the real truth is over time, you're going to have seasons where you do certain things. Oh, I had that CrossFit phase. Oh, I had that, I had that spin cycle phase. Oh, I had this, I had that. But it is, what does it say in Proverbs? That diligence, essentially like diligence leads to prosperity. And it's that the thing you're guaranteed, the health input or the health negative, you're guaranteed to do every single day the rest of your life is you're going to eat. You're going to eat. And so it's the accumulation over time of tens of thousands of those little inputs that are steering the ship one way or the other.
Right.
So as a foundation, the most powerful thing we have at our disposal is eating, because the reason food gets a lesser emphasis, it's necessarily not as sexy, and you're not going to see like sometimes the acute differences. Like, right now there's these little patches floating around, and you can put the patches on, and some people feel incredibly energetic, and that's a very acute difference. And so you start to think, oh, I need to have these patches as a way of life, but you're not going to do them for life. But what is going to happen?
You're just not.
You're not. By the time you get in your 50s, you're going to be feeling it. You're going to be feeling 40, 50 plus years of how you ate. You're going to feel it every single day.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And I think that's really fundamentally what we're all about, because, when we think of that bowl of oatmeal, we don't necessarily feel like a different person afterwards, but it is making that little bit of a difference. And when you go and drive through fast food, you don't necessarily feel like you're going to have a heart attack. Maybe it's the 10,000th time you did it that it happens, but it is cumulative, and each one counts. And I think being reminded of that is beautiful for me.
And going back to what we were talking about a few seconds ago too, about the grades of food, and then to the fishbowl of chemtrails and everything. But we do have incredible. I mean, we live out in the country, so we can hunt and we can grow our garden. But even in the city, New York, California, people have incredible options these days that they didn't have back in the 80s.
You can go get your raw milk in California, right?
Yeah, and you can get you've got big organic produce sections even out now, like Centerville, Podunk, Tennessee town. I mean, people have options. It's more expensive, but it's an option, and sometimes it's worth, an extra 85 cents on top of, something that's organic apple instead of a regular one. And so there are options today. I just like to keep the hope up for people today too,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what's so important to communicate is that there's a cost to things that you think are beneficial. There's a high cost, and it's so hard to communicate it. Like your friend who's on carnivore right now, they're just thinking, this is the greatest thing ever. I'm gonna do this the rest of my life. And I can tell you right now, no, you're not. I can tell you what's going to happen.
Yeah.
You're going to get to about year 4, year 5. You're going to have some issue, some gut issue somewhere. Something's wrong. I don't know what I did. I got to fix it. I got to change. I'll go vegan, whatever. And so the thing is, though, what needs to be understood is that as you're doing these things over time, there's an accumulated cost that's happening to what you're doing there from just not eating a healthy, balanced diet. So you're seeing these acute benefits in the short term, but what no one's telling you is that there's going to be acute negatives in the long term.
Yeah.
And that's, I talk about in the new book, it's the missing reality of what I call time inversion, where the same diet that's beneficial in the short term can be detrimental in the long term. And then when you stack on top of that weight loss and weight cycling, what the picture looks like for the average person is they're jumping from fad diet to fad diet over these 5-year periods, and then they're doing chronic weight cycling, and then it just accumulates till by the time you're in your 50s, it's really, really hard to make traction, to lose weight, to turn the ship, and it's from the accumulation of these extremes.
And what about these people too, these extremes of the intermittent fasting where it's, maybe every second day they're doing full day fasting, and it's just, I mean, they feel fantastic at first. But, for women, especially, we're created to be life givers, and we have, more, situations in our body where, the alarm goes off and says, hey, this is not what we do here as life givers, and so we have kisspeptin in our brain that kind of goes off. I think we have double, and men only have one. And so things tend to just kind of like go pits sooner than with men. So, I find that with intermittent fasting and carnivore and keto and all of that stuff, we tend to not be able to maybe get to the 5-year even,
Yeah, they might get to the 5-year, we don't.
Say with men, it still happens eventually, just a longer bit of time. And what do you say for those hardcore intermittent fasting, maybe even men who are just, it's like every second day, full day, it's part of they half fast.
Yeah, you need to understand that you're shifting the equation of your biology permanently. You're not putting these inputs into this fixed thing. So it's now been proven, and I think it's in chapter 1 in the book. It's been proven that, for example, from calorie cutting, or i.e. fasting, you can rewire the brain. You rewire neurons in the brain to drive increased food intake. So you have, like, let's say you have one neuron or one synapse that's firing, telling you to eat. Well, after a while, you grow more, and now you have 3, 5, 10. So you're increasing the synaptic traffic that's telling you to eat more, and it doesn't happen immediately. This is again, I talk about in the book. It's called the time inversion effect. If you understood the time inversion effect, it's real. Get real about this. So what you see is you jump into the fasting bandwagon. So the whole fasting bandwagon was promoted by people who've never done it very long. And so actually a lot of them now have quit because they're coming into their 5-year window, and and like now, all kinds of things are happening, like they can't lose weight, and so you have to understand that you have so many trips to the well with everything, and to not abuse it and to use it acutely where you need it. I'm not against something like a, X amount of time fast, but you have to understand things are going to be different down the road. A good example, in my first book, I had this thing called the daisy cutter, which is this extreme way of recolonizing the gut using green beans and egg whites.
Yeah.
I can't eat a green bean now to save my life. Okay. I've like, my neurons in my brain have adapted to like food reward from green beans, and it's sunk to the negative now. Like I can't even eat one. I mean, I'm exaggerating. I can eat them, but it used to be no issue. I could eat pounds of them. Can't do it now. And that happened over like 15, 16 years of just doing it too much.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. But speaking of your book, can you tell people like where can people find out about you more, Joel? Where to get your book? Where do they go to visit you, listen to you?
Yeah, so my Instagram is Real Joel Greene with an E on the end.
I love, by the way, I follow you on Instagram. I love your feed. I'm like always cheering you on, man, because I'm like,
thank you.
yeah, I'm a bit of a fan.
Thank you. I'm
a fan too. I just don't get on social media.
Yeah, she's a non-social media
tells
person.
me everything, and then she fills me in.
I love it.
I like to read hardcover books though, so I can't wait for it to
we're
come.
so old school, but but keep going. Tell us where we can see you, find you.
Yeah, so Instagram's Real Joel Greene. I'm on Twitter now, and that's same Real Joel Greene. And then my website is VEEPnutrition.com. And then my first book's on Amazon. The second one will be on Amazon maybe in a month or so. We're trying to do something a little kind of pretty cool with the first book. So, but that's, and I'm on TikTok now too. Just started that. It's Real Joel Greene as well. So.
I doubt the first day you said your new book was out for pre-order, I was one of those ones that were like, press. Still haven't received it yet, but I'm waiting. I know.
So the story on the book is I had to do a full color interior with this book because it's so visual. There's just pictures of food and all this. And then to do and I wanted to do a hardcover with it. And so to do full color hardcover on Amazon, it puts the book like it's $60.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
what I-
Amazon's crazy right now with prices on books. We can't
Yeah.
get good prices on our books either.
So what I decided to do with this was just print it myself.
Yes.
And I printed like 3,000 of them. And that
Yeah.
way I sold this one at $24.95.
Yeah.
And then when I run out, I'll put it on Amazon, and that'll be a paperback with full color, but it'll be like $35, I think.
Yeah.
It's just like to do it on your own, I can make it really affordable. But the problem is now it's just the logistics of like, you got to print and then you got to ship it.
Oh, I know.
and, you
Don't worry. No, I wasn't downing you for the wait. I'm waiting with a happy spirit, honestly, because I let myself, like, I was cheering. Yes, I was giving you standing ovations last night, but I was skip reading because I want to wait for the hard copy in my hands, Joel.
Yeah.
And then
I
I,
know,
just
I
want to
getcha.
sink into it and scribble all over
she
it and
can't-
dog ear
yeah,
pages.
She can't read a book
know.
without dog earing it and pens all over it, and then she passed it
It
along
will
to
be
me.
my best friend, but I think it's so needed. What you are putting out right now are just the emperor, the little boy in the story of the emperor with no clothes on. You know,
Yeah.
just someone saying, "Hey, look, you got no clothes on," and that's the reality. And someone needs to say it. We've been doing our best, but I'm so glad you do it so
Yeah.
eloquently.
Yes.
You remember all the big words and we forget them. So it's brilliant. We'd love to keep in touch
We
with
really
you,
want to
Joel.
be able to tell people too that they don't have to live through the misery that we did, that you did, to be able to come to that common sense at the end and say, hey, you know, in the end, these imbalanced ways, they don't work. I'd love for people to not have to go through that misery. That's kind of what we are all about. Hey, please don't go through the misery. Here's the truth of it.
I think we're on the same page. Yeah.
I think so. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
We so appreciate you coming on with all your wisdom.
Thanks, Joel.
Thank you. You guys are so awesome. I was just like this ray of sunshine. I love you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.